All right. So, round two, lesson two of the warfare studies. It's titled Conventional Warfare. It's been a while since I did one of these. Probably my clip needs to be um, almost a video every 2 days. I probably have about 10, 15 days remaining to do 4 lessons. So figure if I hold myself accountable via YouTube, maybe that'll help me out. So we'll see. All right, let's go ahead and get right into the lesson. Starts off first, actually, let's get into the lesson overview. This lesson addresses the various forms that conventional war takes, from seeking decisive battle to longer campaigns of attrition. Along with these topics, it also explores the concept of the operational art and the debate around the existence of an American way of war. Lesson objectives. In this lesson, the student will describe concepts of and relationships between decisive battles and wars of attrition. That's understanding. Two, describe operational art and how U.S. military theory and practice evolved into the current American way of war. It's also understanding. Three, describe possible future alternatives to the traditional American way of war. That's also understanding. Conventional warfare, sometimes called traditional warfare in doctrine, is the form of warfare that occurs between the formal and legitimate militaries of two states or coalitions of states. Given that these states have formal militaries and will be contesting military objectives, conventional warfare most often takes the form of two militaries contesting the political objectives of the war through a series of engagements, with the object being the eventual defeat of the other side. However, the methods through which these engagements are fought can vary dramatically. They are shaped by the doctrinal thinking of the militaries involved, their capabilities, the geography being contested, and even the strategic goals of the powers contesting those objectives and territories. Within this spectrum, it is common to categorize two forms of warfare pursued: that seeking decisive battle and that seeking to win through attrition. Both of these might be either chosen by a commander or forced upon them by the context within which the war is fought. Following the stunning campaigns of Napoleon Bonaparte, decisive battle assumed a greater prominence. Emperor Bonaparte's swift and crushing victories of his Austrian, Prussian, and Russian opponents set the model for further military thinkers. Future military thinkers is probably what that should say. The pursuit of such decisive strikes has necessitated further coordination of military forces, even as the scale of warfare and emergence of new operational environments has made this coordination ever more complex. This new pursuit of chaining together maneuver and tactical successes to achieve decisive operations has since found a formal title: the operational art. So, interestingly enough, for me, Napoleon Bonaparte sounds like French. Bonaparte, I actually knew a guy, Bonaparte. That's funny. He's a black guy. Um, I think maybe Haitian, so French ancestry. Um, but France, as a country, defeated Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And I'm pretty sure Austria is still around, um, although my Eastern European geography and history is not the best, admittedly. It should be, obviously. Being an officer in the United States Air Force, I probably should have a better handle on geography and world geography. So we'll work on that. Anyway, I digress. Russia was defeated by France, and that is amazing to me. Like, not just victories, but crushing victories, destroyed, destructed. That's interesting because that definitely wouldn't happen today, I don't believe. Um, you know, but I don't know. Just looking at how Russia has struggled with Ukraine in the level, I would not put Ukraine and France on the same level in terms of technologies, training, um, and disciplines. Uh, One thing to keep in mind is terrain, just like Sun Tzu talked about those five different elements. Um, Ukraine has some strengths that Russia is not really accustomed to working around, and they haven't really figured it out. And I would say that between um, attrition warfare and decisive victory, I think Russia went in with the mindset of, hey, we're going to have a decisive victory, and that is our goal, is to capture the capital. And they quickly found out that urban warfare in their army, um, when they did not declare the um, war a war, they classified it as a special operation. That has limitations in terms of how many um, folks and how many soldiers and troops they can deploy. That's from my understanding, anyway. And so it reminds me of 300, the movie, because you had Sparta, and they were going out, and the the politics kind of dictated and limited the military and what they were able to do. And who knows? I think we all know, because history has already happened with Sparta. I personally don't know how it played out. I didn't really follow the second movie, and I didn't really look up the history of what actually happened. I think Sparta, I can't even remember who they were fighting. Um, but it just reminds me of the limitations, because they didn't have approval to deploy a massive or declare war. And so they were only able to take a small contingency to engage the enemy. I think it was Artaxerxes or Xerxes. And so that would have been Xerxes, Cyrus, Darius. Is that Iran or Iraq? I don't know. Um, but that was the war between those two nations, and um, due to the corruption in the politics, it limited what the forces or the country was able to bring um, to bear the Spartans. And so corruption and um, corruption in the sense of seeking a quote unquote unjust war that dictated um, the parameters of Russia. And now Russia could easily just go in and declare war, because their whole thing was to, denazify the nationalist contingent in um, the Ukraine. And so they decided that after a while, that, hey, this isn't working. Maybe we need to go to Plan B. But they still haven't declared it a war. It's still special operations, and so they're limited in how many they can bring. But they changed their approach from the decisive battle or decisive victory to war of attrition. And so that's every day they're dropping, I think, some estimates of 60,000 missiles. And so, couple that use of resources with the sanctions imposed on by this coalition, and they may run out of money at some point. I believe, anyway. I'm not. I don't have any special insight, but it just seems to me that you're burning the candle on both ends. So interesting to see who gives first. And in lesson one, we talked about um, just Clausewitz talked about defense, and I think it's interesting because right now Ukraine is pretty much playing defense. They are starting to transition to offense as they get better weapons, and so this is going to bring in a whole very interesting wrinkle. It does serve as a potential opportunity to maybe get or form a pretext for Russia to declare war, because now you have this nation attacking us. And so maybe Ukraine might want to just kind of, last and outlast um, the Russian Federation. But just my thoughts. Decisive battle versus attrition. Pursue one great decisive aim with force and determination. And that's Karl von Clausewitz from On War. In this manner, Fabius, having given the people better heart for the future by making them believe that the gods took their side, for his own part, placed his whole confidence in himself, believing that the gods bestowed victory and good fortune by the instrumentality of valor and prudence. And thus prepared he set forth to oppose Hannibal, not with intention to fight him, but with the purpose of wearing out and wasting the vigor of his arms by lapse of time, of meeting his want of resources by superior means, by large numbers, smallness, uh, the smallness of his forces. Plutarch, philosopher, 46 through 120 AD, on Quintius Fabius Maximus Verrucosus Cunctator. I think that's how you say it. It's probably not. The study of warfare, especially the study of it in the Western world, has often divided the methods of warfare pursued into two categories. The first is warfare focused on the creation of a decisive battle that will crush the enemy's means or will to resist, thus forcing the cessation of the armed struggle and likely gaining the political objectives of the war. So you have to stop fighting, and then we can work to, hey, you had your will, we had our will. We compelled you to do our will. Now you lay down your arms and you're going to do what we wanted you to do. So war kind of seems like an unnecessary venture, but it's like football games. On paper, this team may be able to defeat that team, but that's why we play the game, and that's why we go to war, because on paper it would seem like Russia would just kind of roll over Ukraine, but in actuality, it's not what's been happening. And I think they're in. I don't even know. I lost count. They're more than 2, 3, maybe even 4 months of war, and still um, no closer to capturing the capital. I think their whole mission has kind of evolved into, hey, we are going to consolidate our gains on this Donbas region, and um, to kind of protect the two breakaway um, nations, if you will. And so basically, we're going to erase borders and we're going to capture Black Sea to try to absorb that land to monetarily work out more for us. And this is all, I think, in attempt to gain more money and to gain more prestige and to return to that pre-Soviet power and that pre-Soviet prestige. The study of warfare, especially the study of it in the Western world, has often divided the methods of warfare pursued into two categories. The first warfare is focused on the creation of a decisive battle that will crush the enemy's means or will to resist, thus forcing the cessation of the armed struggle and likely gaining the political objectives of the war. I know I already read that, sorry. This is taken on many names, including decisive battle and wars of annihilation, and it is generally become synonymous with what is sometimes called a Western way of war. Most of the exalted generals through history have been practitioners of this method of war, from Hannibal and his nemesis Scipio Africanus to Napoleon Bonaparte to George S. Patton. I find it funny that the man's name is Africanus, and I don't think he was an African, but whatever. I'm pretty sure he was an African. British trench near the Albert Bapaume roads at Avalers, La Beausoleil, Boisselet, I don't know how to speak French. July 1916, during the Battle of the Somme. There's a picture of just, this is, in my opinion, it's sourced on Wikipedia Commons or Wikimedia Commons. This is a picture of that trench warfare. You have folks that are just kind of laying down. One guy is holding the top of a hill in a trench, and he's just kind of poised to maybe fire a couple of shots just to keep the enemy at bay. And then you have folks sleeping. This guy almost looks like he's dead, but I know he's just sleeping. He's tired. Each of these commanders managed to maneuver his forces and engage his opponents in a decisive battle, then emerged victorious. The method itself has many advantages. Bringing military conflict to a swift end saves the terrible cost in lives and resources that protracted campaigns incur on both the militaries and the citizens of the state involved in the conflict. The second category takes on the opposite nature of the war of annihilation. A war of attrition occurs when a military does not want to or simply cannot achieve a decisive engagement. Instead, the conflict takes on the character of a protracted campaign with the exhaustion of the opponent as its aim, to either force a settlement or create the conditions whereupon one side can pursue a decisive victory. Many scholars and historians do not generally appreciate wars of attrition. They assess that incompetence on the part of military commanders forced attrition as a method. This has often been unfairly a critique of Ulysses S. Grant and still resonates in the history of the Western Front of World War I. These campaigns led to the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives and caused massive amounts of resources for what often seemed to be extremely inconclusive results. So, a big waste of time. However, more recent scholars have begun to re examine the concepts of war of attrition and have noted many advantages to them which might merit a commander's consideration. While Grant is critiqued, he ultimately did decisively defeat the forces of the Confederacy that he faced. Hannibal, for all his decisive brilliance, still had no answer for the Fabian strategy. While attrition may not bring with it a decisive conclusion, it is also a perfectly logical choice and one that can often carry far less risk. And it's 4:09. I'm supposed to be leaving at 4:10, so I'm going to kind of blast through this. Obviously, there's a replay button for a reason. So, if I can just get this to go to page 3. All right. In all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed in order to secure victory. In battle, there are not more than two methods of attack, the direct and the indirect. Yet these two in combination give rise to an endless series of maneuvers. The direct and the indirect lead on to each other in turn. It is like moving in a circle. You never come to an end. Who can exhaust the possibilities of their combination? The Art of War, Sun Tzu. 544, 496 BC. Following the terrible campaigns of attrition forced by the scale of conflict on the Western Front during the First World War, military thinkers tried to conceptualize a method to rediscover decisive battle. Interwar thinkers like Heinz Guderian, Erwin Rommel, J.F.C. Fuller, and B.H. Liddell Hart struggled to conceive a new pattern of conflict based upon successful late war innovations like stormtrooper tactics, tanks, and air power. These thinkers pushed for a greater integration of these new tactics and technologies to avoid the battering campaigns of attrition, even as they reopened avenues for maneuvers and decisive strikes. These newly conceived concepts initially found their purchase with the German Wehrmacht, whose shocking victories against Poland and France in 1939-1940 introduced the world to the integration of combined arms tactical actions intended to seamlessly and flexibly serve the German strategic goal. As the war drew more combatants into its grip and increased in scale, those German innovations found their way into Soviet and American military thinking, driving the formation of what could be known as the operational art. Since then, the operational art has remained a cornerstone of American military thinking, driving such military combats concepts as air-land battle and the wildly successful drive on Baghdad in 2003. I really, really wish we wouldn't use Baghdad as an example. You have an example of a superior power and a vastly um, underprepared military. They were not adept at that style of warfare, that conventional warfare. It's just not their strength. And so I don't think it's a good example, but whatever. Lesson 1 examined the pivotal role on the operational level of war. According to Jablonski, the operational commander must be constantly interacting with the strategic level, even as he gauges his adversary and determines how to use tactical forces to accomplish that sequence of actions. Accomplishing this is often viewed as an art form. In short, operational art serves to translate strategic level guidance, restraints, and plans into tasks and objectives that can be accomplished via tactical actions. This is imperative because war is such a complex endeavor that all of a combatant's actions must be optimally coordinated at every level in order to achieve success. The definition above also reiterates the importance of balancing ends, ways, and means against risk at every level of war. The necessity for effective operational art is paramount. as reinforced through both doctrine and historical examples. It is also worth noting that a key component of the operational art for the American military is the concept of jointness. Since the 1986 Goldwater-Nichols Department of Defense Reorganization Act, the American military has worked tirelessly to integrate the capabilities of its various armed services. Proper integration and joint utilization of these capabilities are required to leverage the full potential of America's mastery of the operational art. So the services working together. And there's a few readings. Muller, From Theory into Practice, The Evolution of Blitzkrieg. JP 3.0, Joint Operations. Points to ponder from the first reading. What implications does this thought have for future United States military operations? What of the strategic level? JP3 points to ponder. As you read this, reflect on how the concepts in JP 3.0 reflect the earlier generations of operational thinkers and even the concept of decisive engagements. It is asking to read pages 1 through 7 for the first reading and A1 through A4 for the second. The American Way of War. All real Americans love the sting and clash of battle. When you were kids, you all admired the champion marble shooter, the fastest runner, the big league ball players, and the toughest boxers. Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. Americans play to win all the time. That's why Americans have never lost and will never lose a war. The very thought of losing is hateful to Americans. Battle is the most significant competition in which a man can indulge. This is just so ethnocentric. It's just ridiculous. But this was General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army and Seventh Army, 1885 through 1945. So, if he would have lived a little bit longer, he would have saw a couple of ills that we have held. War is a terrible thing. You mistake too the people of the North. They are a peaceable people, but an earnest people, and they will fight too. They are not going to let this country be destroyed without a mighty effort to save it. Besides, where are your men and appliances of war to contend against them? The North can make a steam engine, locomotive, or railway car. Hardly a yard of cloth or pair of shoes can you make. You are rushing into war with one of the most powerful, ingeniously mechanical, and determined people on earth right at your doors. William T. Sherman, General in the United States Army during the Civil War, 1820. The burning of Columbia, South Carolina, February 17th, 1865, by General Sherman's troops. That is so interesting because I just came from South Carolina and I didn't feel a good grasp of this historical event. I know maybe it's from the South you wouldn't look to celebrate an ale, but I think history has lessons that we need to learn from. The concept of an American way of war was first popularized by Professor Russell F. Wigley in his groundbreaking work entitled The American Way of War, A History of United States Military Strategy and Policy, 1973. Wigley was trying to trace the evolution of the way American military forces fought through the various conflicts it had faced. He concluded that although initially the United States' slim control of its resources led her armed forces to pursue low-risk and low-cost strategies of attrition, they later adopted much more annihilation-based strategies, harnessing the growing resources and industry of the nation. There have been continued arguments about why the United States chooses to fight the way it does and whether this is a form unique to the American way of war. At its heart, current American military thinking obviously still falls within the search for decisive battles. The current joint approach to combat and continued emphasis on battlefield dominance has left the American military with few peers. This predilection is driven even more strongly by the rich resource base and extremely advanced military technology available to the United States Armed Forces. As such, the current prototypical idea of the American way of war is that of seeking a decisive battle using the United States' advantages in technology, logistics, and firepower to aggressively destroy our opponent. However, there are two strains of critique for the school of thought that there is conceptually a definable American way of war. The first is that although the superior technology of the United States military offers capabilities that other Western nations do not have, ultimately the practices of the American military are no different than any other country that focuses on decisive battles. The second strain of critique is that the common reading of the American military experience is woefully incomplete and ahistorical. Above and beyond the large scale wars that Americans tend to remember in the historical record, the United States has since its founding fought a series of small wars and irregular wars across the globe. The correction of the historical record complicates the idea that America fights large scale wars of annihilation because it is within the American nature to do so. So, no real conclusion, just kind of like, hey, we think this, but you also have to look at the full picture. And there's two readings here: Echeverria Toward an American Way of War, 1 through 18. Uh, Points to ponder: what is the implication of American way of war? Why is it so thoroughly argued over? Liu, Decisive Battle, Victory and Revolution in Military Affairs, 189 through 211. Is a model of decisive battle still relevant? I want to read that one because I would say that the model of decisive battle is still relevant, but only when we're talking about warfare not involving near peers. Wigley, The American Way of War, A History of the United States Military Strategy and Policy. Wigley's tome offers the original examination of an American way. Shouldn't be reading that. Note, this resource is not available in this course. Visit your local library or bestseller or bookseller. So no one's going to read that. We almost should take that out of the course if it's not available. Why is it still here? To learn more. Conclusion. You should now be able to comprehend the ideas of wars of annihilation and wars of attrition and why each occurs, as well as understand why technologically proficient militaries from the developed world generally concentrate on wars of annihilation. You should understand what the operational art is, why it developed, and how it informs current U.S. military practice. Finally, you should be able to intellectually engage with the concept of an American way of war and comprehend the various analysis of the nature of Americans' military experiences. So, one thing I'd like to point out, it says the developed world in second, in lesson two. In lesson one, it said civilized nations. And these are all words for um, white. And so when I look at that, me looking through my lens, and how we view history probably different than others. I just look at that as a continuation of like white supremacy and that kind of mindset. Even from General George S. Patton, just like how his view was just kind of so, like we're the only ones that want to win. We're the only ones that hate losing. Everyone, they go into war. No one goes to a battle or a war looking to lose. So it's just it's insane to me. But that's what we got. Our thinkers are our thinkers, and with the whole wokeness and everything, you can't get rid of history. It's our history, and so. But I think we need to reframe how we are thinking because initially I said decisive battles and are only relevant in um, non and battles or wars fought with folks that are non near peers. But I might even kind of change that um, because looking at Afghanistan, so this was a war of attrition for the U.S. And although we were able to accomplish, arguably maybe we were able to accomplish the Operation Enduring Freedom mission, um, the Operation Inherent Resolve mission, which was basically to set up a government. It failed. It was a colossal, spectacular failure. We left so much equipment and so many things that are now in the hands of the Taliban. And so we talked about going in for OEF to prevent the launching of terrorist attacks and capturing Osama bin Laden. They just had to identify a person. They eventually captured Osama bin Laden, although I think it was outside of that OEF window. They eventually captured him, but um, I just see that as a war of attrition because we as Americans do not have the stomach for loss of American life. We don't, not a protracted thing. And I almost am starting to believe that the winners of wars depends on whose territory you're on, because um, you could even argue in Iraq that we didn't win that war either. So, I mean, I got some formulated thoughts, but I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up there.